But first, we're going to talk about the police again. We're going to tell a story of a detective chief inspector, a guy called James Mason. Well, he was a detective sergeant at the time, who basically, I think, behaved in a way that many of us would feel should have resulted in him losing his job, but it didn't. Let's talk to activist and comedian Kate Smurthwaite. Good evening, Kate.
Hi, Kevin. How are you?
I'm very well. I'm a bit concerned about this, though. We are now at a stage where the police, particularly Cressida Dick, the Met chief, who's under fire. People say that she should be removed from her post. Before we get to the story, let's just hear her apologising for what happened under her watch. And I refer, of course, to the disgusting Wayne Couzens saga.
There are no words that can fully express the fury and overwhelming sadness that we all feel about what happened to Sarah. I am so sorry.
Well, that's great that she's sorry, but all this happened under her watch, which is why many of us are questioning why she's still there now that the police clearly have to clear up their own house. They really do. She is charged with that task. So as she sets about that Herculean uphill battle, we learn today of the story of a flirtatious Metropolitan Police officer. He's now a detective chief inspector by the name of James Mason. When he was a detective sergeant, he went to investigate a poor lady who had been assaulted, physically assaulted and mugged during a daylight mugging in London. She was injured in this attack. James Mason went round and basically began flirting with her. He said that it was common practice in the police to come on to the victims of crime. He asked her out for dinner. When she said, "Well, my injuries are quite bad," he offered to take up close and personal pictures of them. He was flirtatious. He made her feel incredibly uncomfortable. He behaved in an amazingly, I would say, disgustingly inappropriate way. So there has been an inquiry, a police investigation into his behaviour, and he's been found guilty of all those charges. He's been found guilty of breaching the standards of professional behaviour in respect of authority, respect and courtesy, discreditable conduct and integrity. This was at a misconduct hearing on October the 5th. So he's guilty on all counts of what I've told you, Kate. He keeps his job. He stays a serving officer of the law. When is Cressida Dick and the rest of these top cops going to get the message that what we want to see with people like James Mason is zero tolerance? Women are not going to feel safe on the streets while there are coppers like that serving in the force. What do you feel?
Well, I mean, first of all, yes, of course, I agree with you, Kevin. We have to have a police force that we can trust, and we shouldn't really be surprised that people who want to abuse a position of authority want to join the police, because if they went to work in a call centre, nobody would give them that authority. So we know that these kind of roles attract people who want to commit these kind of crimes.
To be fair, Kate. Obviously, not all officers, but I get exactly what you're saying.
I've not said that. I mean, what we're saying is that the people who want to be awful will be attracted to those. I mean, so will the people who desperately want to help the community.
Yes.
And that's great. But we have to make sure that we have robust systems in place to stop that. But it also frightens me when I hear this suggestion that somehow we can solve this problem by making sure that people who are a menace to women don't become police officers, because I don't want to be afraid of, builders and plumbers and dentists and IT support workers and everybody else that I have to interact with. I'm not reassured really to go, well, don't worry. When we find out somebody has harassed women, in the case of Wayne Couzens, we know indecent exposure had been alleged against him. And there've been hundreds of other allegations that have come to light now. I'm not confident going, well, at least now they've indecently exposed themselves. They they won't be working as a police officer. No, that's not the penalty for indecent exposure. Your job opportunities become restricted. The penalty is you go to court, you are prosecuted, and you are punished for the crime that you've committed, and hopefully rehabilitated before it gets to the point of somebody getting raped and murdered, as has happened in the case of Sarah Everard and sadly so many other women.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the case of Wayne Couzens and his propensity for exposing himself, because the famous DJ Emma B said today, or has revealed, that a long time ago, 13 years ago, she was pushing her baby down the pavement in Greenwich, near where she lives in South London, and guess what? Wayne Couzens flashed at her, exposed himself at her. She said she went to the police to report this vile incident, and they laughed at her, which feeds into...
We had 13 years notice.
Yeah.
And I mean, actually, that's just because Emma B is a high profile individual. So her story, has been put into the papers and so on and so forth. We had at least 13 years notice. We also know that the police were notified of allegations against him 5 or 6 years ago. The fact that we have just sat there, and if you roll it back and look at the John Warboys case, the taxi driver who turned out to have assaulted and raped hundreds of women, as far as we can tell, has hundreds of allegations against him, was convicted on at least 8 of those. The police, they even admitted, that they'd been receiving these reports for a really, really long time, and they'd ignored them, they'd dismissed them, they'd concluded that, these women must just have been drunk, or they'd made a mistake, and they couldn't find the thing. And rather than taking these allegations seriously, women were ignored. And I think that it's what we have to start doing is accepting that the problem is, yes, of course, the problem is these bad people who do these things, but the problem is also a culture that doesn't take these allegations seriously.
Absolutely.
And when we ignore them, then of course that people get away with it, and then they think, I can just do this then. We actually would be much better off. And I know, because I've done it myself. I've been to the police when I've received, threats and harassment in person and also online. And they're like, just like change your email address, and you're like, but hold on a minute. I know that would protect me from getting another message from this person, but it's not going to make this person stop doing it.
Yes.
We're not actually solving the problem. When I block somebody because they've sent me, horrendous graphic images, for example, on social media, well, yes, you're right. I'm protecting me from getting any more of those, but I'm not protecting the next person. And we should be working as a society to go, actually, I shouldn't have to spend my afternoons blocking people on social media. I shouldn't be getting horrendous stuff to start with. And when we can knock these things on the head, as soon as we see that behavior come to light, we stand a much better chance of building a society where we haven't got, and the truth is that, yes, a few of these cases are high profile, but there are thousands and thousands of these cases going on all the time, all around us. It's a cultural thing.
And that's the problem. Wayne Couzens was symptomatic of a sort of toxic cop culture that clearly has thrived. And let's not beat about the bush. It's thrived under the leadership of Cressida Dick. So I personally would very much question the decision to allow her to carry on in that job. We needed a new broom. But given she is tasked with that, we're stuck with her now. I hope
my personal experience is that I've had almost, without exception, negative experiences of reporting sexual harassment threats
to the police. And it's got to stop, hasn't it?
I've had almost universally negative experiences. But I must say, I have had slightly better experiences when I've not been in London. They haven't been perfect. They haven't been without sort of cause for potentially complaining. But in my experience, the Metropolitan Police are notably worse than other forces. I'm not saying that nobody's ever had a bad experience with anybody else, but I distinctly remember being in the West Midlands area, and it wasn't perfect, but it was better. Listened to what I said. They wrote it down. They took it seriously. They made steps to investigate it. Something was done. Whereas when I've had that experience with the Metropolitan Police, not only has nothing been done, but in fact, as a victim of crime, I've been treated ridiculously. They've made appointments for me to give a statement, and then when I show up, they say, "Oh, sorry, that person's not working today." And I'm like, "Well, I just took the day off to come and make a statement. It's not." It's not acceptable that victims of crime, because it just deters me from wanting to report the next time.
That's what they've got to sort. That's exactly what they've got to sort out. Now, the other thing, to go back to our friend James Mason, He was found guilty of all this inappropriate behaviour against this poor lady who was mugged by 4 men and quite badly injured, and he saw that as a romantic opportunity. But he was found guilty at a police misconduct hearing. Now, what I would suggest is, so this lady quite rightly complained about his behaviour. I think that these internal inquiries, these internal police misconduct hearings have to end. They have to be external. That the police no longer should be allowed, or the Met Police in particular, given the Wayne Couzens situation, should no longer be allowed to mark their own homework. As someone who's been through having to deal with the Met Police in these circumstances, would you agree that it's time that complaints against serving officers have to be taken out of the hands of the force itself? It must no longer be allowed to mark its own homework. It should be an independent authority that investigates.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's true in a number of situations around our culture right now. You know, the fact that the newspapers basically run their own regulatory body, and so things never seem to get escalated, things never seem to get sorted out. And it's been my experience. I've made a number of complaints about the police, and and they write back, and quite often they go, "Yeah, you were right. We did address you disrespectfully, but we've dismissed all the other points." Yeah. And you've got no comeback on that. You're like, well, actually, the other points I've made were perfectly valid.
Because they're looking after each other. That's why. They're looking after each other. They're looking after fellow officers. That's why Wayne Couzens was able to prosper in the police force. Don't forget, his career was going very well, and his nickname among his colleagues was the Rapist. And there were several charges, lots and lots of charges of his behaviour. He was always indecently exposing himself. And guess what? They investigated and sort of put it on the back burner. And basically, he's a copper. He's just like us. Look after him. That's what's going on, and that's what has to finish.
Yeah, I'm afraid as a comedian, I cannot resist saying that he was accused of indecent exposure and then there was a cover-up. It's just, I'm sorry. I know it's a very serious subject, but sometimes
it's actually very opposite. Exactly right. It really is. Listen, Kate.
But it is exactly that. It is exactly that. There's a culture within that, and we know that he was sending inappropriate material around. We know that there were in-jokes about mistreating women between him and his colleagues.
On his WhatsApp group,
on this WhatsApp group. And I mean, the very idea that we can have a serving police officer whose nickname is the Rapist. I mean, that's
extraordinary. It's extraordinary.
Of course, we need to do better than that. And anybody who worked with him and knew that that was his nickname and didn't do something about it is, as far as I'm concerned, in part culpable for the situation. Because we shouldn't be tolerating that culture, and we should be asking, why is there anybody in the Metropolitan Police who will tolerate working in that culture and won't stand up to it? And yes, I'd like Cressida to step down. I think that would be the right move. But I also honestly think that I would quite gladly disband the Metropolitan Police and make them all reapply for their old jobs, and we'll run a much more extensive check on them, and the ones that get through can have them back, and then we'll perhaps appoint some more people, and let's appoint some more women.
Yeah.
Because I can't help thinking that when, for example, this woman you talked about, she's been assaulted by 4 guys. Wouldn't it be so much better if she could say, when someone comes around to take a statement, could it please be a woman? Yeah. I'd feel more comfortable. I
agree.
I've asked several times for a female officer, and I've always been told, oh, you just get what you're given.
Yeah. Oh, you do. Kate, I'm sorry, time is against us, but it was great talking. Thank you so much.